this edition of the Revelation File. We are on a series of programs right now in which we're introducing you to my library, my One World, New World library that's been built over several decades now, since the 70s, in response to the Lord calling me into this particular kind of ministry. It was to be an end-time alert ministry. It was intended to awaken the body of Christ, to inform the body of Christ of the times that we're living in, like no other time in all of history. We are a generation that I'm convinced will see the coming of Jesus in the sky. We will witness and experience his return. And the elements of the day, the news elements, were to be the old prophecies being brought to pass. And so, having begun this ministry just short of my entering into the world of media, the Lord laid out the path by which I would be educated in this area of how the Antichrist administration would be structured, how it would come into existence, and the setup of the world that would receive such a leader who has long been prophesied as being the history's most dictatorial dictator that the history has ever seen. So we left off with a book, and we'll begin there in just a moment. But first I want to again enter in our disclaimer. We do use copyrighted material, sometimes in part, sometimes in entirety, strictly for the purpose of education and information. We want our audiences to know what we're trying to share with them is fact. And so we feel that we're on good ground with the copyright law and the fair use statement. And so this is for our YouTube providers that will try to do all things legal and in good style with them. But we precede the program with this disclaimer statement. When we were last with you, we were introducing you to Peter Singer. Peter has been noted by journalists everywhere as being the world's most influential living philosopher. He's a professor of bioethics at Princeton University. He's also a laureate professor for the University of Melbourne, Australia. He wrote a book back in 2002 entitled One World, The Ethics of Globalization. And we quote him in this book saying, quote, "Is the division of the world's people into sovereign nations a dominant and unalterable fact of life? The growth of the global economy itself marks a decline in the power of the nation state." End of quote. If you were with us in our previous program, we set before you the stage by which world leaders are changing their world outlook that's been mostly fueled by professional advisors and counselors that have come to them to educate them on the way of the world, the need of the world to leave the nation-state model behind and enter into a new world where you have just a single earth government. And the materials that I have researched over 30 years lends themselves to this particular mindset. And Peter Singer is addressing this in this book, One World, The Ethics of Globalization. Growth of the global economy itself marks a decline in the power of the nation state. He goes on to say, quoting, "We're moving beyond the era of growing ties between nations to something beyond the existing concept of the nation state. This change needs to be reflected in all levels of our thought, and especially in our thinking about ethics." He goes on to say, "What we need is a redefinition of state sovereignty, or more accurately, an abandonment of the absolute idea of state sovereignty that has prevailed since 1648. We need a sound global system, a system that we really are one community." End of quote. And this lends itself back to the training of two generations of young people to think globally and act locally. And this is the theme of what he's addressing. Our next author is William Greiter, who wrote the book One World, Ready or Not, and it was published in 1999. He passed away in 2019, but he was an American journalist and author who wrote primarily about economics. He's been a correspondent and editor of the Washington Post, New York Times, Rolling Stone magazine, and The Nation. And here you see samples of the books that he's written. And so he comes highly pedigreed, if you would. And he's a man who knows his stuff as far as research is concerned. And the things that he addresses, again, have caught the attention of national leaders, especially national and state leaders in this country, but also leaders outside this country as well. So, quoting from his book, One World, Ready or Not, quote, "Old verities about the rank ordering of nations are revised, and a new map of the world is gradually being drawn. Everything seems new and strange. Nothing seems certain anymore. The maps keep changing so rapidly that it has already become commonplace to speak of one world," end of quote. Saying further, one world now evokes a different, more ambivalent set of emotions. The essence of what is forming now is an economic system of interdependence designed to ignore the prerogatives of nations, even the most powerful ones, end of quote. So what he's saying there is that American influence, European influence is waning in the face of a global community mindset among the nations. So our voice is not as solid as it has been in the past as a nation. He goes on to say, "What is the nature of the storm upon us? A new structure of power is gradually emerging in the world, forcing great changes everywhere that it asserts itself," end of quote. Now, again, he's addressing what the book on entropy was about. That entropy from a governmental and societal position suggests that in the course of time, society itself is going to naturally fall apart and dissolve and fall into chaos and tyranny. The second law of dynamics, thermodynamics. So from something other than just a scientific perspective, from a political perspective, entropy is expected, and we're experiencing it now as we're witnessing all this social chaos in this nation and in other nations elsewhere. And so these writers are approaching this proactively, saying, let's go ahead and build the infrastructure, let's present the plan, let's build on that plan of what lies beyond the present status quo of nations, so that our transition into it can be as seamless as possible, even in the midst of chaos. And that's how they explain what's going on right now in the social divide in this country. It's all part of entropy. The demise of the old and the birthing of something new. Alvin Toffler is a well-known writer, futurist, and he's written a number of books, and he passed away in 2016. You can go to his website, tofflerassociates.com, to find out more about him and the material that he's produced over decades. But he's an American writer, futurist, and businessman known for his works discussing modern technologies, including the digital revolution and the communication revolution, with emphasis on their effects on cultures worldwide. He's regarded as one of the world's most outstanding futurists. And here I've featured four of his top sellers. They've all been top sellers, but four being Future Shock, which he's mostly famous for, The Third Wave, Creating a New Civilization, and Power Shift. In the book Future Shock, which was also repeated in his book in 1980, The Third Wave, and Creating a New Civilization in 1995, he writes, quote, We are creating a new society, not a changed society, but a new society. The world is fast emerging demands, wholly new ideas and analogies, classifications and concepts. Old ways of thinking and believing no longer fit. Now, pause right there. Old ways of thinking and believing no longer fit. That falls into the category of religion, philosophy. Old ways of thinking and believing no longer fit this new model of the new world that's coming forth. If you study Bible prophecy at all, you know what the Bible says about the increased persecution of believers in the last days. We won't fit. We're outside the box. The new box is being designed. And Alvin Toffler all but says that in this comment. Old ways of thinking and believing no longer fit. He goes on to say, this new civilization has its own principles for the politics of the future. We are the final generation of an old civilization and the first generation of the new one. We find ourselves being between the dying second wave and the birthing of the third wave. End of quote. So Alvin Toffler and the other writers are preparing their readers, conditioning their readers to think globally, act locally, because there's something new that's coming. The book One World or None has its place in history. According to the publishers of this particular book, One World or None, quoting, in 1946, just months after atomic bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, One World or None was published. In it, the scientists who had developed nuclear technology came together to express their thoughts and profound concerns about the nuclear age that they had unleashed. The book became an immediate bestseller and went on to sell more than 100,000 copies. Continuing the quote, in these 15 thoughtful essays, legendary scientists, including 5 Nobel laureates, among them Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein, and Robert Oppenheimer, try to help readers understand the magnitude of their research even as they fret about the implications for world policy and caution. End of quote. Albert Einstein, in this book, is quoted as saying, we must openly and decisively meet the problem of depriving national spheres of power of their military strength, turning such power over to a supranational authority. Now, are you picking up on what he said? The only way for the world to survive a nuclear dark age is to strip all nation states of their ability to create a military infrastructure and to place all such military infrastructures in the hands of a supranational authority. That's a one world system under a single leadership, whether it be a leadership of international leaders or one man is yet to be seen. But to eliminate the ability of all nations to go to war using their own military machine and take what exists and put it into the hands of a one world system, such as the United Nations, right? That's what Albert Einstein said. He goes on to say this, and I quote again, this preliminary step should be taken with conscious awareness that the ultimate goal is the denationalization of military power altogether. Real security is tied to this needed action. End of quote. When you read the other nuclear scientists that were part of this book, you find that they all carry the same theme. Close the door on the ability, the power of nations to create their own military infrastructure. And let's bring it all together under one banner of peace and order and orderliness so that the world can survive. One world or none. That's the name of the book. Zbigniew Brzezinski. Sounds strange, except for those of us who came up through the President Carter era. Zbigniew Brzezinski was a Polish-American diplomat and political scientist. He served as a counselor to President Lyndon B. Johnson from 1966 to 1968, and was President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor from 77 to 81. He was active in the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, and later the Trilateral Commission, which he co-founded with David Rockefeller. In his book entitled Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic era. I couldn't read the small print there. It came out in 1982, and he makes this comment, and I quote, "The Technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities." End of quote. He wrote that in 1970, long before our present level of technological advancement in this arena of around-the-clock, never-ending surveillance and monitoring. And this was the part of the new era that Brzezinski is addressing. As we move into this new world order, this kind of infrastructure would be necessary for such a system to operate efficiently. So this is a sample of our library. And there are more books that we could bring to your attention. And but I don't want to paint a dreary picture to you, because I know how sensitive the human spirit is along these lines. But what you see on the screen right now is a journal entitled Design and Action for a New World, a Provisional World Parliament. This was given to me back in the 80s by Dr. Philip Isley of Lakewood, Colorado, who founded and started the New World Constitution Association, or the New World Constitution Parliament Association. And this was the first of a couple of documents that he put in my hands that were the building block for a New World Parliament and a New World Order. And in here, he outlined some of the laws that would be brought into existence under this New World Parliament, and how it would be structured, and how often they would meet. And it's intended to replace the United Nations one day as the single most organizational group for a new world order, one world government. To the left of that is the Emerging Constitution. Rexford Guy Tugwell is the author of that book. And Mr. Tugwell served on the cabinet of President FDR and President Roosevelt. And in this book, exhaustively, he designs a new U.S. Constitution, complete in article and section form, on the premise that the current Constitution is too old, and it's rigid, too rigid, it's not flexible, and it's out of date, and there's the need for a new Constitution. And in the back of that book, The Emerging Constitution, he provides the model of the new U.S. Constitution, which would also be renamed the Constitution to the New States of America. In this book, he outlines redesigning the United States of America from that being 50 states to 10 regions. That was done in 1962 by President Nixon in issuing an executive order establishing 10 regional regions of this new nation called the Regionalized America, the New States of America. each region having its own capital, separate from the current state capitals. This new Constitution is also an emergency document. It will not need to be ratified by the states or by Congress. All that's required is for us to have a national emergency declared by the President with martial law. And according to this presentation by Rexford Guy Tugwell, once that occurs, then this new Constitution, which has already been designed, is intended to go into immediate effect. Now, according to this book, the new Constitution would last only 25 years, at the end of which another Constitution would be written and presented and be renewed in 25-year increments, never going back to the old Constitution, but always moving forward with progressive new constitutions. So in this group of books that I'm presenting to you here, down at the very bottom, the Single Global Currency, there's a website by that name that you can also go to and review and research and look at plans for a new global currency, a single global currency for this new world that we're moving into. So these are just samples. Before I leave, let me draw your attention to America 2, the book that captures Americans in the act of creating the future by Richard Louv. That's an intriguing book as well. It points out and brings to the surface the redesigning of America, and he's calling it America 2. And when you read this material and you familiarize yourself with the overall blueprint of the development of a new world order, then you are better able to understand what's going on in this country right now. It has little to do with the issues at hand. It's all part of a process of breaking down the strongest nation on earth in ways that not a shot is fired, not a shot is needed. You can change the country from the grassroots up and make it more viable for where all the other nations are being brought together. Again, this is not conspiracy theory, folks. Once the theory becomes a fact, that's what you got, conspiracy fact. And this is where my research and writing and reporting has been since the 70s. And as we go into another segment of this in the closing moments of today's program, I want to continue this thing that we're doing here in showing you some of the other elements of our library, this time having to do with media and magazine. And this is New World Media Publications. And I want you to see this particular video as we go into this next segment.
World government is the structure necessary for global justice.
First, we Americans are going to have to yield up some of our sovereignty. That's going to be, to many, a bitter pill.
In this segment, and you just saw Walter Cronkite address the fact that with this new world order, this one world federation, there's going to be the need for the surrender of national sovereignties. And in those nations that have strong sovereignties like the United States, that's going to be a bitter pill. But it's necessary for this new world system to go forward. In this next segment, we're introducing you to the media and the magazine that I've collected in our library over the years, and just to bring to your attention some of the statements and conditions that we find in, again, the general press that works parallel with the book authors that I showed you just a moment ago. From CNBC, we find this element having to do with China, and why China's rise may call for a new world order. The international community needs to reestablish a world order based on rules as the rise of China coincides with the decline in European and American power, according to business and political experts. This is why I mentioned a while ago that the voice of Europe and the voice of America is waning in the global community at large as being voices of influence, because the mindset has set in to move into a new world order, and China is leading the pack on this, as CNBC reports here. Another source, National Catholic Reporter, now is time to build a new world without inequality, injustice, the Pope says. This came out in April 20th of this year, 2020. Another couple of sources, again, point to the fact that the Pope has recently called for a new world order. Now, what's interesting is that it's not just this current Pope, but as far back as 2-3 popes before him, papacy has called for a new world order. In this particular slide, Pope's plea for a new world order, put forth by the Mail Foreign Service and picked up by Reuters. The Guardian also reports that the Pope calls for a new world order. The Sydney Morning Herald of July 9th, 2009, Pope calls for a new world order. Pope Benedict has proposed a new world political authority with real teeth, he says, possibly in place of the United Nations, to enforce an ethical financial order and end the global financial crisis. Again, the call for a replacement for the United Nations. And I showed you before the blueprint, the founding blocks of the New World Parliament, designed and intended to replace the United Nations in course.
Have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
You have been watching the Revelation File Report with Wally Wood, a Wally Wood Ministries production from Houston, Texas. You are able to support the ministry by donating at wallywoodministries.com and by mail at Wallywood Ministries, P.O. Box 42005, Houston, Texas 77242. Wally is available to present full 2-hour forums in your city called the Revelation File News Forum. For more details, contact Andy Valadez at 713-560-3348 or by email at andy@andyvaladez.com. The Revelation File News Report is a weekly update of global trends in the news as it aligns with end-time Bible prophecy. Tune in again next time and be sure to like and share this channel.